afternoon and welcome. It's just so nice at the end of this day to welcome you here, especially Susan and Marianne. We're thrilled to have you here and so proud to show the accomplishments and the work of our students. They have been working very hard with the purpose of this, their work as Lubar Scholars, to exert positive change in the Milwaukee's public schools. And I know that that's something that your family cares deeply about, and we care about it as a whole, as we care about our city of Milwaukee. And so the Lubar Scholarship allows Alverno to support and retain very promising young educators. And I can't think of anything that really will bring us closer to the future that we want to have in our country than to have really young, talented, passionate educators in the schools, especially in the cities. This is our 6th cohort of Lubar Scholars. So they're out there already making a difference in Milwaukee and around. And it's just a joy this afternoon to both thank our benefactors, but also to thank and applaud the work of our students. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Joseph Foy, who's the Vice President for Academic Affairs.
Well, thank you so much, Sister Andrea, and thank you, Susan and Marianne, for being here. Thank you for all of the students and the faculty who have been engaged in this work. We are tremendously grateful to be able to have you engaged, particularly right now, where if the last year and a half seems like 12, have taught us anything, it is how valuable our educators are and how important the work is that you do. So I just feel like it is such an honor for me to be here, to be able to learn from all of you, and I'm grateful to the Lubar family for all of your support. Thank you.
Great. So when we had our first group of Lubar Scholars, I was in a different role at the college, and now I am very proud to be the Dean of the School of Professional and Graduate Studies. So in that role, I'll just explain a little bit about what's happened this year and then right away hand it over to the main event, to our students. So this year, as I transitioned out of my role at the Center for Academic Excellence, I was so appreciative at a time when it's hard to ask people to do more, that my colleague Paul Smith, who is a professor of psychology at Alverno, but trained in educational psychology, was willing to step forward and lead the students in their process this semester. And Paul he also runs our IRB. He is a masterful researcher, and we were very lucky to have him. So thank you, Paul. And then also thanks are always needed for Laura Sear, who is our administrative director, who helps us to shepherd through this process as well. So they should be recognized tonight. But the students, we always ask them at the beginning of the process about what topic it is that they want to explore. And they know that, it needs to be grounded in what's needed in MPS, but also they think about what do they need to develop scholarship and before they start their work in the school. So they kind of have something in their pocket already that can be data informed and research driven when they get into their classrooms. And I don't think it'll be any surprise that the students decided that they needed to think about issues of inclusion, especially in light of the change to digital learning this year. Students across the city have been heavily impacted by this new modality of learning. And while it provides us all with exciting opportunities to get together digitally and to learn together digitally, there are significant issues when we think about questions of inclusion. So they're going to walk us through what they studied, and they decided, because of this different mode that we're going to be in tonight, where we're not in person, that they're going to really try to personalize their research. And so as they kind of go through some of their findings throughout the presentation, they'll be talking about applications that they can think of. And then at the end, they have some reflections on the meaning of this work to them. So that's what you can expect. And it is my honor to reintroduce Angelina Rodriguez, our recent graduate student speaker at American Family Field, and also a future K through middle school educator in general education. Angelina.
So yeah, I'll go first and introduce myself. So I am an education major. I just graduated on Monday. My licensure is K through ninth. I do, right now I'm student teaching at Frank Lloyd Wright in West Dallas. So I teach 7th and 8th graders, and I hope to find a teaching job in the middle school field because I actually do like the middle school field, which a lot of people think I'm crazy for that because they're like, what, middle school? I feel like that's the that's the grade level to avoid, but middle school is my forte. So that's me.
And then I think the students, you're going to introduce yourselves. So why don't you tap each other as you go through?
So Monse, if you want to go first, and then we can just go through the line on the second slide.
Sorry about that. So my name is Monse Alvarez, and I'm an early childhood elementary with double majoring in Montessori education. I will be graduating in May 2022.
Hi, my name is Valencia. I actually just graduated with my degree, Bachelor of Science degree in elementary and middle education, as well as English language learners. And I've been with Alverno for 4 years and part of the Marianne Lubar Scholars for 3 years.
Hi, I'm Catherine Ennis, and I am an early childhood and elementary education major. I will be graduating in December of 2021.
I am Isabel Gamza, and I am majoring in elementary education with a minor in special education, and I will be graduating in May 2022.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Nunez. My major is in early childhood education, and I also graduated this Monday along with Angelina and Valencia.
Hello, I am Madeline Tripp. Age group along with Montessori 6 through 12. I should be graduating next May.
Hi, my name is Samantha Gastelum. I'm majoring in early childhood education and elementary education with a minor in bilingual and ESL studies, and I will graduate in 2022.
Hi, my name is Savannah. I am majoring in elementary education, and I'll be graduating in May 2022.
Hi, my name is Suela Morales, and I'm an early childhood education major, and I will be graduating in the spring of 22.
Okay, so before we go into our whole research project that we did here, I just want to take the time and speak for everyone and how much we truly appreciate the Marianne Lubar Scholarship. It really has shaped our education and has benefited us in getting to the point that we've reached or that we're trying to reach. So we just want to start off by showing our appreciation and really letting you know how much this really means to all of us and how much this has impacted our education and overall how much you really have helped us and how much we appreciate this opportunity. So,
well, let me tell you that I want to thank you as well. You're all, I know that you're all stellar students, and how hard it is sometimes to put it all together. And I feel very grateful to be able to give you a helping hand. I hope in your closing remarks or whenever that time comes, I'd love to hear why you went into education and what you hope will be one of the results anyway, or some of the results from your teaching.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, towards the end, we could definitely talk about that and kind of like our journey of, being education majors and, what we've experienced and why we choose to be educators. So yeah, we could definitely talk about that. So going into what we are going to be presenting is our research question. So we did focus on equity, in which we know that equity is an important piece in education in order to meet all learners' needs. So our research question is, how is equity being implemented in the virtual, hybrid, and in-person classroom to promote an all-inclusive environment for student-centered learning that supports students in MPS? So I just want to say, for a research question, we did focus on MPS specifically. So, okay.
So before we started our research, we kind of had to step back and think, what does equity mean to us? Because you can look it up online, you can look it up in a book, but we wanted to have a direction that was personalized for ourselves. So altogether, we came up with that equity is giving that personalized and appropriate resources, supports, accommodations that are needed for all individuals to reach common goals, no matter race, gender, socioeconomic status, or bias. And a big roadblock that I feel like we hit was, when you look at equity, you see that comparison with equality. And so on our next slide, we have a very clear separation that we made, that the equality refers to that uniform distribution, and equity is, on the other hand, refers to fair distribution. So we're looking at what fair, appropriate, needed support is being given, not just handing every child the same thing.
I just have to comment on that visual. It's fabulous. Who put that together? That is really it. I mean, it just says it all in the picture. It's wonderful. Nobody's going to claim it. I won't interrupt you anymore.
Wasn't it you? I thought it was Monse, wasn't it?
I added it in there. I felt like it just kind of, I wanted to make sure the slides weren't empty. Working with kids and everything, it's like kids need visuals and so do adults. So, but here at this point of the presentation, you see this cool graphic that says, wait, but why? So our research is so important to us because all of us we come from different backgrounds, and we've all had various different experiences in our education that has made us realize, okay, there are a lot of things that are kind of inconsistent and ways that equity needs to be in our in education. And as educators, we were trying to think, what can we do to impact education, especially at MPS? So that's kind of why our research is so important to us. We want to make sure that our kids have a better experience than what we had as students.
So what does it mean to be all-inclusive? In an all-inclusive classroom, we welcome all students with or without learning differences to participate and feel comfortable in the environment. Inclusion classrooms support all students, like we mentioned, academic, social, emotional, and communication needs. In addition, inclusive classrooms are filled with diverse learners that lets kids learn and talk about how everyone learns in their own unique way. And sometimes students are able to make connections with each other about how they might learn the same or different. And then in the image on the right, we have 4 words. The first one is exclusion. We're able to see that the colors, the dots, are being left out or excluded from the general group that's shown there. In the second square, we have the word segregation, which means separating something that might look completely different from the group. Then we have the word integration. Yes, these colors are being included in the big picture, but they're still being excluded from the general group. And then lastly, we have the word inclusion, which means that all colors, no matter what color, shape, size, doesn't matter how they look, they're all being involved. And I believe this image is very powerful because we're able to see a visual representation of what inclusion really looks like. And then sometimes as individuals, we confuse these words because they might convey a similar meaning, but they're completely different because they each have like their own importance. So why is an all-inclusive classroom important? Well, there's many reasons why it's important to be inclusive with our students and our community. Everyone in the classroom will benefit from being all-inclusive. All students will feel like they belong no matter what their learning style is like or what their individual assets are. All students are provided with supports that they need as unique individuals, and an all-inclusive classroom strengthens the ability of all children to work together and collaborate with one another. And then lastly, they will also understand and value different points of view shared by the people around them, and they're able to make critical connections, and they're just able to see how they connect with one another, and they create a positive environment.
So, like I mentioned earlier, I do, right now I'm student teaching at Frank Lloyd Wright Middle School in West Dallas. So I had the opportunity to ask my cooperating teacher a couple questions and a team member on the admin team, just questions about equity. And I know personally, I know from what I'm seeing in staff meetings and the things that we talk about that, the school is really trying to incorporate equity in their school and through staff meetings and through, we have these equity meetings talking about different ways that we can incorporate equity in the classroom, which is really, I think it's, really beneficial for the school system because equity is important for all students, and students definitely do deserve to have the equal, that opportunity to reach their goals in whatever way that works for them. So some questions that I asked my cooperating teacher that I work with were, how do you define equity? Does it differ from the MPS definition? So there is a specific definition for MPS. And then what are some practices you've used to promote equity? Have they worked? What are some things you think that are getting in the way of promoting equity? So some of the key points that I took from her responses were that, there are many interior and exterior forces that can really come in between developing like equitable practices, and one of those things being like our own bias, which can be a barrier to promoting equity. But I think it's important to be self-aware and to continue working towards servicing all students and, providing that support for them. Also, the school itself, they really cultivate like a common vision and a mission to that is essential to supporting teachers. And this means overall just having those resources to incorporate equitable practices in the classroom, and overall talking about it with instructors and teachers and overall educators on how to teach, utilizing equitable practices, which is really really important in the classroom to utilize, and it's beneficial for students, definitely.
And then also, for the semester, I had my internship at Maryland Montessori in Milwaukee. I had the opportunity to interview my cooperating teacher as well. And again, the purpose for this interview is to further understand what our current teachers are facing and if they're having any support from MPS, considering professional development. Specifically, I wanted to share with you two questions that really, similar to what Angelina said, convey like what they're facing. And the first question is, how is professional development being offered to Maryland Avenue, and what equitable practices are being discussed? So she mentioned that MPS is a whole professional development established. And for her school, for Maryland specifically, there were numerous of plans they had similar to behavior concerns and attendance, and they look across the board to see what kinds of students these things they're being affected by. It could be students of colors, students that are bilingual or low-income students, and basically they all gather a percentage number and come up with a plan. And this is part of their weekly staff meetings, which I think this is something we as educators do want to see in our schools when we move forward in our careers. And adding to that equitable practice, the second question asks how that impacts students. And she shared with me that the parents have a lot to do with it, of course. At Maryland specifically, most parents do work from home. So they have the ability to help their children, and they also have the ability to fund some of these resources that come handy for their day-to-day learning environment.
So going off of what Monse said and also what Angelina said, their interviews show us that there are things in place that MPS and West Dallas School District are trying to implement. But also from research, I found that their plan states one thing, and then there are some things that do need to be clarified based on some researchers who work with equity, and they go from different states and schools to try to figure out how we can clarify equity plans so that they're more productive versus just being something that we say or do. So one thing that their equity plan says is that MPS's equity plan says that they require all school-based teams to operate using an equity lens. But Monica Liston, she's one of the researchers who actually reviewed the plan, and she asked, what exactly are you asking teachers and staff to do? Because you say that you want them to use this equity lens, but how? So they kind of said like the plan's going to be updated to reflect the changing needs and events, but they're not really saying exactly how. And like Angelina said and Monse said, some schools have taken it their own initiatives versus working within the district to try to figure things out. So I also took that as a way to reflect on what Liston asked and just said, like, what can I do? You know, not necessarily, I'm not going to work for MPS. I got a job next school year. I'll be working with Oak Creek Franklin School District as a teacher or an ELL teacher. But I started thinking about what I could do in my practices. So Monse, if you want to go to the next slide. So I said, I'll be the change. I don't know what they're trying to do, but I want to be the change. And I think many of us have said within the group that we want to be the ones who implement this. And that's why this research is so important to us, because it allows us to continuously reflect on our teaching and find ways that we can impact students more positively. So this chart here you'll see is that it says positive, inviting school climate, student supports and intervention, high quality learning, all these great things are some things that we're thinking we could do in our classroom. And one way that I've done it already with my ELL students, I showed them this book. So this book is called A World of Kindness. It's written by Anne Featherstone, and it actually has donations. So all the illustrations in the book have been donated from different illustrators around the world to support this whole initiative. And you can do donations to this. It's called Think Kindness. And their mission is to inspire measurable acts of kindness through programs that challenge students in schools around the world. So it's a huge initiative that's going on. And I felt like this would be a great story to read to my students. It teaches students all about empathy, so understanding other people's perspectives, how to treat people kind, no matter what like age they are, because it asks questions throughout the book. So it's great for me to have the conversation and discussions with the kids. It's not just reading, but it's asking them questions and talking about these things. So then after reading this story, I also have this graphic organizer, which is really important. That's where in this chart, you see that it says student supports and interventions are important. So one of the ways that you can ensure a more equitable classroom is by providing all like graphic organizers and things for all students to try to meet their needs of all of them. And this assignment You can see here that there's a spot where the kids can draw a picture and down here they can write. So my purpose of this assignment is for kids to think about what are some ways that you can be kind to someone? What are some things that you've done in your life or some things that you maybe have seen where people have treated, despite the background, they've been treated well. And so they can draw this here, they can draw an image, and then they can also write about it here. This allows them to have that practice with writing, reading, speaking, all the four ways that we learn language. And then to add to that, since this book is all about multicultural backgrounds and things like that, I also found these crayons, which I feel like are really helpful because these are crayons for basically when kids, they can color with any skin tone. So, when I remember when I was growing up and I would do school assignments, I'd always try to figure out what crayon can I use to match my skin tone. And there was always one that was either too dark or too light. So I felt like this is a great way to ensure equity in the classroom because then you can talk kids can choose whatever color they want. And these kids are also amazed by the fact that they can do this. Hey, there's a crayon for me. I even recently had kids draw portraits of their partner sitting next to them. And it was pretty cool to see that kids could find the skin tone that matched their partner. And we're excited to talk about those things. So being the change is what's important to us. Doing the research is one thing, but being the change is the thing that really shows how this research has really helped us.
Okay. Hi. So my slide is based around the expectations and reality of remote learning. This is more of my personal opinion about it. But when we first started going into remote learning, I don't think that a lot of us had any idea what we were getting into or what our expectations were or how it was even going to work out, and much less that it was going to be a longer term measure than what we expected. So I think a lot of us expected this is going to be temporary, so it's okay to just skip over some things, kind of try to get some education in. But I think that it kind of harmed in the long term, now that we had to do it for longer and be on Zoom, that we didn't actually have a plan set out to help students have equity in things like their academics, in the lesson plans, in terms of getting access to technology, having enough resources. So mine was kind of my slide was based around how in academics there are certain things that teachers could help with. For example, if a student needed to stay extra or have extra time for this one thing, we had ways to control kind of what our students were getting out of the lesson. And I feel like moving over to technology kind of lessened those opportunities to connect with our students and to provide for them in the areas that they need. And also being inclusive in lesson plans, it's kind of harder to do when you're through a computer screen. I feel like the engagement of the students is not there sometimes, and it depends on the student for sure, but there are certain factors, for example, having a crowded living space or having too much of a noisy household, having responsibilities in your house that kind of hinder the learning in the student and their household. There's also things I've had this where parents don't understand the technology, they can't help their student, they can't help them with homework, or their household might be bilingual, or their teacher might not necessarily be able to communicate with the parent directly, or they might not have access to Wi-Fi, they might have issues with technology. Like I mentioned before, they might have things that hinder their education, like noise, responsibilities, just their household in general. And I think it's kind of hard, especially because, like Valencia mentioned before, that there is a plan that we have now put into place for how to be equitable, especially like during this COVID situation. But there's not a lot of specific language in the plan. It's very clouded and flowery, and it has a lot of good feelings, a lot of good intentions. But there's no concrete action to it, which I think is like a big issue, because you can get teachers going, you can have them be in a mindset where they want to help. I think every teacher is truly a helper at heart, and they have a heart to do good, but giving them actual steps, like for example, I'm gonna use Valencia's example again, like using like the different colored crayons to actually make them feel like that's something inclusive. It's not something that would be written down or actually might not even be discussed. But I had a great teacher in my field last semester who kind of learned her practices through the Center of Urban Teaching. And she was really good at making her students feel included and making her students feel like they were a family. And I felt that was the first time I felt like really, really in awe of a teacher being able to do that, because it made the whole environment feel more like a home. And I want to be able to do that for my students in the future as well. So even though remote learning kind of caused a rift in inclusivity, I feel that knowing that we are all trying to be good educators, that we will be able to bridge that gap for our students. Thank you.
So transitioning into this idea of the new world of technology that we have come to, like we are here today through Zoom presentation, where once it was in person. I just want to talk with everyone here about, especially you, Marianne and Susan. What is it like for you? Have you had to use Zoom or online communication? What is your experience been like?
You were very hard to hear in the beginning, and so
Okay.
I don't think that I got it all.
All right, so let me repeat that. Sorry, I'm moving my mic around, trying to figure it out. Again, with this new world of technology, perfect example. What is it like for you guys, or have you been able to have the opportunity to be on this, to use Zoom or online communication, especially since this pandemic has happened? How has that changed for you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're really asking me that question, I have, I think Zooming is a real skill. Presenting the Zoom is a bigger skill, and that is not an easy thing to do. So what I'm doing in listening to all of you is I keep moving my pictures to try to get who's talking. And it takes a little while to do that. And so, I mean, we all know how difficult it must be to teach virtually. That just seems like an impossible task. And I'm so looking forward to the fact that I think everyone's going back to school now. Everyone seems quite determined to have that happen.
I'll chime in too, just to participate and answer your question. I love Zoom when I'm fairly active on it, and I have a role. Sometimes when I'm sitting and listening, only listening, and you only see the speaker for 45 minutes or an hour, I find that my body gets so antsy, I need to move around, and it's really a challenge. I've witnessed some amazing ways of using Zoom and the breakouts and the polls and this and that. And I've also had to teach on Zoom. And I personally have found that the Zoom classes get more attendance because people don't need to travel, but most people's screens are off. And so I get less feedback as the teacher. So as I say, there's pros and cons to it, but what's amazing is something like this, where we can have access to all of you and still hear about what's going on. It's just a beautiful thing. I appreciate it.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Joining in, let's have Valencia speak first, and then I'll continue on with my point.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, like Desiree also said, I totally agree with Susan, because most of this semester and all of the school year, I was with the same first grade kids virtually. We use Google Meet, and I noticed my kids were getting so like antsy all the time. So one way that my cooperating teacher and I helped with equity in the classroom, we started implementing a 3-minute dance break. So we'll turn on the song Happy, and we'll let the kids get up and dance for 3 minutes. And our hours, like our classes, are now only an hour. So it's not all day that the kids have to sit on Zoom or Google Meet. It's just 1 hour that they sit in for the reading segment, and then an hour in the afternoon for math. And everything else is asynchronous, which can be a damper on, you know, their success. But at the same time, at least the kids are getting the knowledge that they need as much as we can. But yeah, I totally get that. Sitting there and just listening to people, no fun.
You know, many moons ago, I taught first grade. And when I was doing that, just recently talking to my daughter-in-law, who's a teacher, I just can't imagine trying to teach first graders virtually. It's hard enough with college students or our peers, our colleagues. I just have enormous admiration for teachers who are able to do that and to recognize the adaptations that need to be made so that the kids are able to even tolerate it, you know. And then we haven't even added in when they're in homes where they're fighting over one device, or they don't have an environment where it's conducive to them learning. And so blessings on you. I just have enormous admiration for any and all of you who are trying to do that this year.
Thank you for those points, Valencia and Andrea.
Yeah, one more thing. So Andrea, you were saying, like, how do we do that? The first graders, we use Jamboard with them. I don't know if you've heard of Google Jamboard.
Yeah.
But it allows them to all write at the same time and draw and do all these things. So it makes them feel like, oh, I can draw in class. You know, like they can still do fun things even though we're virtual.
Yes, but one of my favorite things to say about first graders is that they have the attention span of a flea, you know. So just getting them to focus, I admire you, Valencia.
Thank you for those points, Valencia and Andrea. Desiree, do you want to add one last point real quick?
Yeah, one of the things that I think I want to commend all the scholars here. And one of the things that I think is a really powerful connection is how well you're modeling something that's underneath both effective teaching for equity in face-to-face settings and effective teaching for equity in online settings like this, is that you're conveying to your learners that we matter. You're anticipating our needs. You're seeking ways to deliberately integrate us and include us. And having been a first grade teacher, I will defend them all day long. First graders are awesome, Sister Andrea, and they do have amazing ability to attend. But actually adults, like Susan was saying earlier, we also have to think about adults' needs, and that first graders might need to move while they're learning, and so might adults, right? And so all of those things, I think, help us when we're thinking about the equity issues related to learning, both in online settings like we're doing today and in face-to-face settings, either pre-pandemic or post, right? Like, I'm hopeful that we'll all be able to take forward these important issues that these scholars are raising for us. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. With that being said, we also wanted to go into how specifically it does impact the students in the classroom. So do you want to get into that?
So mental health is a really big thing for students, whether they're in class or online. their routines are super important to them. And with everything switching and the constant being either in quarantine or just like having to be on their computers, their whole entire schedules change. So it's really hard for them to focus, and it's just really hard for their mental health overall. There has been a couple studies going on, and students have been reported being more stressed, having more anxiety, and even more depression, even within the younger grades. And also it kind of connects with the H1N1, which is commonly known as the swine flu. They had more than 700 schools closed, and 30% of those students who were online at that, or were in that pandemic, said that they had PTSD from it. So that's something that we will have to look for when we get done with this pandemic and our young students. So we're hoping that the transition of going back into school will help them have a better mental health. And then I currently work at the Alverno daycare, and one of our classrooms is dedicated to students who are online. And here are just a few quotes from some of my students there. They have a bunch of different ages, so some of them are kind of funny, and some of them kind of make your heart hurt because some of them are in kindergarten and they just don't want to be on their computers anymore. And one of them, who's in 3rd grade, always says that her teacher deserves some chocolate because she's doing such an amazing job, and she just thinks she's so stressed. So it's sweet to see how much that the little kids care about their teachers, and they know that it's a stressful time for them too. And then here's just a graph that was taken in fall 2019 and then spring of 2020. As you can see, the depression, the red line is the 2020, is a lot bigger than the depression in 2019 for our students. Anxiety is about the same, and mental health, impaired academics, 6+ days is pretty high for our young students. So you can see how much this has been impacting our students.
Okay, and then going on, so remote learning environments pose a lot of challenges, and we're starting to see that it's a lot of challenges are hitting students of color. So this research project done by the Urban Institute looked into all these household factors that have evidential ties to lower academic achievement. This was done before the pandemic, but the Institute posted an article about how these effects can only be predicted to worsen during the remote learning. So some of the factors that they looked into were students who are linguistically isolated, students living in crowded conditions, students without access to a computer, no adults in the household that have completed anything higher than a high school education, and students with disabilities and students living in poverty. So we have a couple numbers to show you, just glance at it. So it goes into the different categories of students. And we have the Asian American and Pacific Islander students that identify as Latinx, white students, and Black students. So this first one that talks about linguistically isolated, we can kind of just peek at the numbers. Linguistically isolated is categorized as if no one age 14 or older in the household speaks English or speaks it well. A student living in crowded conditions, we can peek at those numbers. A crowded condition is defined as more than one household member per room. That doesn't include bathrooms, patios, porches, balconies, things of that nature, just bedrooms. And we can look on to the next one. So no computer or internet in the household, which I feel we are all kind of hitting right now with our students, is if students don't have the computer or access to internet, we're seeing a lot of numbers jump on that one for students of color. No adult with a high school diploma or equivalent in the household. That one's kind of self-explanatory. We see certain categories of students hitting that a little bit higher too. Then on our last slide of all these little graphs, disability Disability can include students who have cognitive, ambulatory, independent living, self-care, vision, or hearing difficulties. So that's what they kind of wrapped it all to. And then living in poverty is a family income that is at or below 100% of the federal poverty level. So our last slide on this kind of wraps it all together for us to just see how many factors are hitting each of these students. So if we move on to the next slide, it kind of shows us all of that shown together. So we can look at the factors that's at the bottom, so number of risk factors, and then which races are hitting these factors. And if we move all the way over to the right, we see students that are being affected by 3 or more of these factors that all can affect our education are those students of color. So now we have to look at, why does that matter? Because this whole research was done all over the whole United States. Why does this matter for MPS? Because that's what we wanted to look at. So if we look on these next statistics are from MPS specifically. So in MPS, these are demographics. It says 80% of those students are special ed, or 20% of the students are special ed students. So then we have to step back and look at those disabilities that are affecting the students. So 20% are hitting that factor in MPS right now that can only get worse once you stick them at home and we don't have the supports for them. In MPS, we can see that students of color make up most of MPS. So we saw those 3 or more factors hitting those students, and now we look right in our neighborhood, and that's what we're working with and teaching. And it's hard to look at that they're hitting these factors, and it's such a huge demographic of the school. And then the next slide shows us just a couple more, that economically disadvantaged is a huge one. So 82% show yes for being economically disadvantaged and MPS. So that can be the factor of living in poverty, but it also affects the students' access to internet, access to those materials. So the next slide was a quote that I think is kind of just like the huge wrap up of all of this, that this quote from Natalie, I believe her name is Spivak, and Megan Gallagher. This does not reflect a lack of effort on the part of families, but rather a magnification of structural inequities in school quality and home environments baked into our society. The legacy of racism may be more visible during the pandemic, but it operates all the time, making it harder for Black and Brown children to succeed in school. Now, this is made as a generalization of the whole US, but looking back on our demographics for MPS, that is what MPS is working with. So as educators, we need to remember that social inequities play a huge factor into equity in our classroom, because we're not just teaching that student that walks into our classroom. We're teaching a lot of the time in despite of or along with those social inequities they kind of bring in their back pocket. So I know that myself and the team that I worked with on this project all kind of agree that because we know these inequities are happening in our students' life, we need to constantly be reflecting on our knowledge of our students, our knowledge of our community that we're working in, biases, practices, and beliefs that we have working with our children, because school, especially for any age and these younger groups of kids that are at home, school is not a place that you need to come and worry or be worried about what you're going home to or what materials you didn't have ready for a class because you can't afford them or you don't have them. School is a place to learn and to grow, and kids can't learn when they're worried about other things other than school. So we need to, as educators, not only look at our equities in the classroom, but giving them equity along with what they bring to us too.
So I know we have more that we wanted to present, but I think for lack of time, we're going to skip forward to the question that we were initially asked by Marianne at the beginning, where she was asking us why did we get into education and what are we looking to do with the information that we have. So if someone wants to go ahead and share that, their response to that, then we can go ahead and get into that now.
I can start.
I'll start. So I just want to answer the question, what this research means to us. For me, the research, I had learned a lot about what it means to have an equitable classroom and school as a whole. And as part of our research, I viewed a video that focused on equity in the classroom. And what I learned from that video is that we do need a focal student approach to learn from that. You'll be able to reflect on what the students need. So you'll be viewing one student and then you can kind of learn from that student what all the other students might need. And then kind of going into viewing a different student. And I've also learned that you must respect the diversity of the community to create and promote a positive learning environment. And this research and scholarship program has given me the opportunity to learn more about equity as a whole and how I can play a role in creating a more equitable environment in my classroom and how I can enforce the equity policies in my student teaching, field placements in my own classroom. And so to answer the question Marianne posed, much like Valencia said, I want to be the change in a student's life, to be able to show them that I care about them and their personal needs, not just their educational needs. I was inspired by my third grade teacher to go into education because she always made me feel like I could do something with myself, and I want to be that person for other students. And so with that, I just want to thank you, the Lubar family, again for giving me an
Yeah, that was very inspiring to me. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't want to
No, I'm
interrupt
sorry.
you. No, because I know that we're kind of rushing to finish this off, and it's been outstanding. I can't tell you how impressed I am with all of you. And now I really want to hear these remarks.
Sure. So going off of, what this research means to us and your question, I want to be a teacher because growing up, I didn't have the opportunity to have a safe space. I was very shy and timid because I felt like I didn't belong both socially and like in a learning environment. Like socially, because I'm both Hispanic and white. And I felt like I was either too white for the Hispanic group of children, and I was too Hispanic for the white group of children. So it was kind of a very awkward stage in my life, I guess. And then as far as my learning environment, it was very hostile in only having predominantly like white older women as my teachers who were stuck in their own habits and way of teaching. And me having a somewhat unique name of Soila. At the beginning of every year with a new teacher, it would always be, well, I'm gonna mess this name up, or don't you have a nickname to make it easier, or this may take a while to remember. So I want to be an educator who creates a safe space for all students, regardless of any differences, and to be all inclusive with my teaching and future as an educator. And so then going into this research, I also watched a webinar about equity in the classroom, focusing on mindsets of both the students and educators, and how mindsets need to be both mindsets need to be positive and supported to be successful. So again, this scholarship and research has given me the opportunity to learn about equity and how I can become an effective educator and leader in my future classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That was beautiful too. That really was touching.
Yeah, all of it. Mm-hmm.
We have come to the end of our presentation here. Does anyone have any questions for us as Lubars? Do you have any questions specifically for any of us or in general that we can answer?
I just want to note one thing that I'm noticing that's different from since I started teaching, which was only 15 years ago. But I think what I hear all of you talking about implicitly is a relationship with the kids you're teaching. And I believe that that is different than the way teachers used to be trained, which was to teach content. And I hear that you're really so focused on a relationship, and I just think it's beautiful and want to wish you good luck. It's refreshing to hear that, because that is a hurdle for many teachers, but that is the key.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. I think that, you really can't teach content effectively if you don't have those relationships. So, the kids aren't going to really listen to you or understand or even want to learn if you don't have those relationships with your students. So I think, yeah, relationships are like building those relationships with your students is like the main thing that, really helps and builds on their learning.
I'm actually curious, and I think it would be neat for our students to hear, because Susan and Marianne, you've both certainly felt a call to both teach and support teachers. I'm curious about who a teacher was that made a really positive difference in your life that now is flourishing decades later, because then I think our students can see how every day they've got a chance to basically sow the seeds of positive intent several decades in the future, right? Like they may have a young Marianne or a young Susan in their classrooms right now, right? So who made a difference for you?
Well, I can tell you for me, two teachers stand out. One was my fourth grade teacher, Miss Vance. I still remember her name, and I thought she was so beautiful. And she made me feel so good. She empowered me. And that is how people learn. And the other one was the school librarian who handed me books that I wouldn't have chosen for myself. I didn't think I was old enough. I didn't think I, was smart enough to read those books. And she made me feel so good about it that I've been a library proponent my whole life. I mainly read books from the library still. And as a teacher, you have such an impact on your students, and you may not even know it, but when you're doing a good job. And you all are outstanding. I just have loved hearing this. I think the hardest part of equity is applying it and understanding how to apply it. And that will be a learning experience for you probably all your life. Susan.
That's such a good question. I have so many teachers that I admire. I actually keep a file of teachers right now, and with notes of things that they say that inspire me. And in going back to elementary school, I remember Mrs. Christensen, my first grade teacher, and first grade teachers, we've heard today, they make a difference because they make you feel like you're in the right place and you're safe and you can try things out. And in ninth grade, I had a history teacher who really just helped me see history from a different point of view. Not as different as I have seen it in this last year, but way different from the way I had been learning it. And so learning just keeps going. And I think any teacher that encourages you to love learning, it's an important skill for your whole life. You just never stop. And that's all I can say. I think teachers are amazing. I have huge admiration for teachers.
And so we have to do much better for our teachers. We have to see to it that they feel successful in the classroom. And because we need more of them, many, many more teachers, good ones.
Caring ones.
And that's what your organization's doing for us. It's really providing us with support to become you know, the teachers that we, you know, the teachers that we saw in our schools and that we looked up to is the teachers that we learned from and that we want to be like, and, you know, incorporate some of those things in our own classroom to be effective.
Well, you're all very articulate. It was an amazing experience to do this on Zoom. I can't tell you how proud I am of all of you. And I wish you just the best of luck and keep in touch with me. Let me know what's going on. I love to hear.
Marianne, I do want to say that, like, thank you so much for doing this for us, especially me. Because of your foundation and because of the scholarship that you offered us, I'm the first person in my family to graduate with a bachelor's degree. So I wouldn't have been able to do that without you and your
Yes, congratulations. That's really wonderful.
Valencia, I want to kind of brag on you because you also have another opportunity this summer that's building upon your research. Would you mind sharing with Marianne and Susan about that?
Yeah, so like being part of this research made me realize how much I love doing research because I'm such a curious person. So like basically with this research and actively reflecting on what we can do in our classroom, I was like, well, I think I'm interested in knowing how kids think so that I can help them learn better. So this summer, I'm doing research with UW-Madison around educational psychology and more specifically mathematics. And my area is fractions because I was horrible at fractions when I was growing up. So I'm going to try to figure out how kids learn fractions and how we can, you know, like when I teach reading to my ELL students, they're working on high frequency words. And the thing about reading is that you look at a word and you just know it right away, you know? And so like with me, I'm thinking like, okay, I know that my mentor for the research that I'm doing at UW-Madison, he said, I'm going to show you this slide, but I don't want you to read it. And I said, okay. And he showed me a slide and the slide said stop. And I tried not to read it, but then he went to the next slide and he's like, did you read that? I was like, yes, I read it. He's like, I told you not to read it. Why'd you read it? I said, I couldn't help it. So he's saying like, you know, the idea that you can instantly look at something and just know it. How can we do that with our kids so that they can understand fractions without having to try to figure out, you know, like it's so hard for us with fractions, but so easy with reading after much practice. So what can we do? I'm really interested in trying to figure that out this summer.
If you figure it out, you can come and teach me. Thank you so much. This has been just outstanding.
If that is all our questions for tonight, I would like to say a special thank you to everyone for coming.
Oh, look at that adorable little girl.